The shocking fate of the Saxons under Charlemagne's rule on the frozen planet Heligra. The Saxon colony lived far from the eyes of the galaxy. Jagged ice cliffs stretched for miles, and the wind howled through endless plains of frost. Yet despite the harsh climate, the Saxons thrived. They were hardy, strong, and proud, preserving the old ways of their ancestors while slowly adapting to life among the stars. Life on Heligra was not easy. The Saxons had built their cities from the ice and stone that dotted the landscape. Towers rose like crystal spires, reflecting the weak light of Heligra's distant sun. Inside these cities, people worked tirelessly. Engineers maintained energy shields, farmers grew nutrient-rich crops under protective domes, and children learned both old stories and the science needed to survive in this unforgiving world. Among the Saxons, there was a quiet confidence. They knew they were far from the reach of the galaxy's larger powers. Here, they ruled themselves, following the traditions of courage, skill, and honor that had guided them for centuries. They were free, self-reliant, and careful to trust only those who had proven themselves. But everything changed one cold morning when the sky above Heligra darkened. It began with a shadow. At first, the Saxons thought it was a storm, the kind that often swept down from the northern ice cliffs. But the shadow moved with purpose. Towers shook as massive ships descended from the sky. They were unlike anything the Saxons had seen before, sleek, metallic, and enormous, with lights that cut through the foggy atmosphere like blades. Ealdred, a young Saxon engineer, was the first to understand the gravity of the situation. He had been inspecting the outer energy shields that protected the city when he saw them. His breath caught in his throat. "Ships, too many to count," he muttered, his words almost lost in the roaring wind. The citizens of the Saxon colony gathered, their eyes wide with fear and awe. From the sky, the fleet's banners were visible, symbols that the Saxons immediately recognized from old stories and galaxy maps. Charlemagne's mark. The tales of Charlemagne had reached Heligra long ago. He was a leader unlike any other, commanding fleets that could crush entire colonies with ease. And now, he had come for them. The Saxon council convened immediately. Elder warriors, engineers, and scholars crowded into the main hall of the ice citadel. Flames flickered in the great hearths, but the warmth could not reach the tension in the room. "We must act," said Wulfric, the eldest of the warriors. His voice was calm but strong. "They will not negotiate. Charlemagne does not ask, he conquers." "But we know our land," Ealdred replied. "We know the ice plains, the cliffs, the hidden passes. They may have machines, but we have our minds and our courage. That must count for something." The council debated long into the night. Maps were spread across tables, showing routes, natural traps, and places where the Saxons could hide or strike. It became clear that a direct confrontation would be suicide. Charlemagne's fleet was too powerful, too organized. But the Saxons were clever, and Heligra was theirs. By dawn, a plan had emerged, not to fight with raw force but to outthink their enemy. Scouts would monitor the ships, tracking their movements. Engineers would reinforce the city's defenses. And small groups of warriors would use the terrain to harass the invaders, slowing them down and forcing them into mistakes. As the first light of Heligra's sun glinted off the icy spires, the fleet hovered closer. The ground trembled under the weight of the enormous landing crafts. The Saxons could hear the hum of advanced engines, a sound that made even the bravest men and women uneasy. Then the first contact was made. Small squads of Charlemagne's soldiers moved toward the city. They were fast, disciplined, and heavily armored. Yet the Saxons were ready. From the ice towers, engineers fired precision energy pulses that forced the soldiers to retreat. Hidden traps triggered avalanches, burying small groups of invaders under snow. It was only a taste of what the Saxons could do when the land itself became their weapon. Ealdred watched as one of the enemy machines struggled in a narrow canyon. He smiled grimly. "They are not invincible," he said. "They do not know Heligra as we do." Even with small victories, the Saxons understood that survival depended on more than clever traps. They needed unity. Families, warriors, and scholars worked together, reinforcing shields, maintaining communication lines, and sharing supplies. Every person had a role. Every person mattered. The invaders, however, adapted quickly. Charlemagne's commanders were intelligent, disciplined, and relentless. They studied the Saxons' tactics and began using machines designed to counter ice-based traps. For the first time, fear gripped the Saxons. The enemy was learning, but even as fear spread, so did determination. Ealdred and his team experimented with ways to use the environment against the invaders in unexpected ways. They built mobile ice fortresses, gigantic structures that could move across the frozen plains, powered by hidden engines. These fortresses were impervious to standard attacks and could strike the enemy with energy pulses from safe distances. The first fortress was ready after 3 days. It moved silently across the plains, appearing suddenly to disrupt a landing squad. The invaders were stunned. They had expected traditional defenses, not something alive and moving, built entirely from ice and ingenuity. The Saxons celebrated their success quietly, knowing it was only the beginning. They had bought themselves time, but Charlemagne's full fleet loomed in the distance. The young engineer, Ealdred, began designing new strategies. Each plan was riskier than the last, but each carried the promise of survival. Meanwhile, the invaders' presence brought changes to Saxon life. Markets slowed as citizens focused on defense. Children were taught emergency drills. Every citizen became part of the colony's strategy. And in this shared purpose, the Saxons discovered something deeper than courage. They discovered unity. One night, under a pale aurora that painted the sky in green and purple, Ealdred stood on the highest tower of the citadel. He looked at the distant ships, their lights blinking like stars gone astray. He thought of his ancestors, who had survived harsh winters and fierce battles. He thought of the people depending on him, and the plans that would test both skill and nerve. "We will survive," he whispered to the wind. "Not because we are stronger, but because we are human, clever, brave, united, unstoppable." And so the first chapter of this epic confrontation closed. The Saxons knew they faced an enemy unlike any before, but they also knew one thing clearly. The spirit of humanity could shine even in the darkest, coldest corners of the galaxy. Heligra was theirs, and they would fight to keep it. The first battle was only a beginning. What awaited them would test their courage, ingenuity, and resolve. Yet the Saxons were ready. They had something that even the most powerful fleet in the galaxy could not destroy: the unyielding heart of humanity. The icy plains of Heligra had never been so alive. The distant hum of Charlemagne's fleet reverberated through the frozen valleys, a constant reminder to the Saxons that danger lurked above and all around them. For weeks, the invaders had circled the colony, sending squads to probe defenses, testing traps, and studying the Saxons' every move. Ealdred stood in the command center, a cavernous hall carved from ice and stone. Holographic maps of the surrounding terrain floated above a long table. Small lights blinked across the projection, marking the positions of enemy squads and machines. Saxon warriors and engineers moved in a coordinated dance, reporting data, planning maneuvers, and checking defensive systems. "We cannot allow them to establish a foothold," said Wulfric, the seasoned elder and commander of the city's warriors. His deep voice carried authority, yet there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "If they take the northern pass, they will surround the city in days. We must act." Ealdred nodded. "We will use what they do not expect. The ice can be our ally, and the machines they bring can become our tools if we are clever. The first step is to slow them down." Outside, the Saxons' small strike teams prepared for their first major offensive. Using the long shadows of the towering ice cliffs, they moved silently toward enemy outposts. Each warrior carried compact energy weapons, traps, and a small supply of explosives. Their mission was not to destroy the entire fleet, impossible, but to show that the Saxons could not be easily defeated. The first encounter occurred at the edge of a narrow canyon. Charlemagne's soldiers had set up a forward observation post, assuming it would remain safe. They had underestimated the Saxons. Ealdred's team released small drones that emitted ice mist, creating a blinding fog. Energy pulses fired from hidden positions struck with precision, disabling sensors and scattering the invaders. The Saxons struck quickly, capturing vital supplies and retreating before the enemy could regroup. The invaders were shocked. They had expected simple defenses, but the Saxons had thought ahead, turning the frozen landscape into a weapon. Charlemagne himself watched the reports with interest. He had faced countless rebellions and colonies, yet the Saxons' ingenuity impressed even him. "We are not dealing with ordinary humans," he said, his voice firm over the fleet's communication network. "They think like engineers, fight like warriors, and survive like wolves. Increase scouting and probe every weakness. We cannot underestimate them." Back in the city, the Saxons celebrated the small victory quietly. Supplies were secured, and intelligence gathered from captured devices provided insight into Charlemagne's strategies. But they knew this was only the beginning. The main force would not remain idle for long. Ealdred and his team returned to the workshop, where they began constructing new defenses. They had already tested one of their greatest innovations, the mobile ice fortress. Now, they wanted to expand the idea. Several structures, each equipped with energy pulses and reinforced hulls made from compressed ice and stone, would move across the plains, striking suddenly and retreating before the enemy could respond. Meanwhile, the Saxon children and scholars worked to create decoys. Artificial drones, shaped like warriors and built with basic energy projectors, would confuse the enemy and make it appear as though Saxon forces were larger than they truly were. It was a simple idea, yet one that could change the course of the battle. The next encounter came sooner than expected. Charlemagne sent a larger squad, including several advanced machines designed to break through ice-based defenses. They moved methodically, analyzing the terrain and using scanners to detect hidden positions. For the first time, the Saxons faced serious danger. Ealdred's ice fortress moved into position. The massive structure glided silently across the plains, its surface blending with the snowy environment. From hidden ports, it fired energy pulses that disabled the invaders' machines. At the same time, Saxon strike teams emerged from the shadows, hitting the soldiers with coordinated precision. The invaders stumbled, their advanced technology no match for the cleverness of the Saxons and the unpredictability of the environment. Despite the success, the cost was evident. Several Saxon warriors were injured, and some of the ice fortresses suffered minor damage. Ealdred inspected the structures carefully, noting weaknesses to improve for future battles. Charlemagne was not deterred. He studied the tactics, noting how the Saxons relied on terrain, surprise, and intelligence rather than sheer force. He ordered adjustments, machines capable of freezing the ground beneath the ice fortresses, energy pulses designed to detect hidden Saxon positions, and automated patrol drones that would scout every corner of the plains. The next few days became a tense game of strategy. Both sides adapted rapidly. Saxons built hidden tunnels beneath the ice cliffs, creating escape routes and surprise attack positions. Charlemagne's forces deployed scanning devices and advanced sensors to counter the hidden positions. Each day brought a new challenge, and every skirmish tested the minds and courage of those involved. One morning, a new threat appeared. A squad of invaders carrying heavy assault machines advanced toward the eastern ridge, a strategic position that overlooked the city. If the enemy captured it, they could launch attacks directly into the heart of the colony. Ealdred and Wulfric devised a risky plan. The ice fortress would draw the machines into a narrow pass, where hidden explosives and energy pulses would trap them. Saxon warriors positioned on higher ground would strike from above, taking advantage of gravity and the icy terrain. The plan required precision, timing, and absolute trust. Every participant understood the risks. As the machines advanced, the Saxons moved into position. The air was tense, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The first strike was perfect. The ice fortress emerged from the fog, drawing the enemy forward. Explosives triggered beneath the machines, freezing them in place, while energy pulses disabled their controls. From above, Saxon warriors descended, striking with careful efficiency. Within hours, the squad was neutralized, and the eastern ridge remained in Saxon hands. The victory was celebrated, but there was no time for complacency. Ealdred knew Charlemagne would not stop. The invader fleet would bring even more advanced machines, and the battles would only grow more dangerous. But each victory gave the Saxons hope, proof that human intelligence, courage, and unity could prevail against overwhelming odds. During a quiet evening in the command center, Ealdred reflected on what had happened. The Saxons had survived the first clashes not because of strength, but because of creativity and teamwork. They had turned the environment into an ally and shown that even the most advanced forces could be challenged with strategy and courage. Wulfric approached him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You have done well, Ealdred. These victories may be small, but they show the spirit of our people. Never forget, our strength is in our minds and our hearts. Charlemagne may have fleets and machines, but we have something he cannot destroy: human ingenuity." Ealdred nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "We will continue to fight," he said, "not with hatred but with skill and courage. Heligra is ours, and we will protect it at all costs." The night sky was clear, the stars reflecting on the ice like countless tiny mirrors. In the distance, the lights of Charlemagne's ships blinked silently. The next encounter would be larger, more dangerous, and unpredictable. Yet the Saxons were ready. They had learned that survival depended on thinking ahead, trusting one another, and never underestimating the power of human creativity. And so, the first major clash of wits came to an end. The Saxons had defended their home, bought time for their people, and demonstrated that they were more than simple colonists. They were strategists, engineers, and warriors capable of outthinking a galaxy-spanning force. In the weeks that followed, both sides prepared for the next stage of the conflict. Charlemagne adapted his strategy, deploying heavier forces and new machines designed to counter the Saxons' clever traps. The Saxons, in turn, experimented with even more daring ideas: moving ice fortresses, automated decoys, and tunnels that could channel enemy forces into prepared ambushes. Life on Heligra became a constant rhythm of preparation, adaptation, and vigilance. Families contributed wherever they could, engineers worked tirelessly, and warriors trained day and night. Every success, every small victory, reinforced the Saxons' belief in themselves. They were not powerless in the face of overwhelming odds. Ealdred spent long hours studying the enemy machines, seeking patterns, and designing new strategies. He became the heart of the colony's defense, guiding both warriors and engineers. But he also understood the limits of technology and strategy. True strength, he realized, lay in the unity and courage of every person willing to stand for Heligra. As another long day ended, Ealdred stood at the edge of the northern cliffs, looking out at the frozen plains below. The distant hum of enemy engines echoed across the ice. Yet he did not feel fear. He felt determination. He knew the coming battles would be hard, but he also knew one thing clearly: the Saxons had something that Charlemagne could never defeat: the unyielding human spirit. The clash of wits had only begun and both sides were learning fast. Charlemagne's forces were powerful, but the Saxons had something equally formidable: ingenuity, courage, and the will to fight for their home. And as the first stars of Heligra's long night appeared, the Saxons prepared for the next challenge, ready to defend their world, their people, and the honor of humanity itself. The days on Heligra grew colder, the winds sharper, and the ice plains more dangerous. Charlemagne's fleet had begun to tighten its grip, sending larger squads and more advanced war machines into Saxon territory. Each day brought new challenges, forcing the Saxons to innovate, adapt, and rely on every ounce of their ingenuity. Ealdred studied the holographic maps in the command center, his brow furrowed. Red markers showed enemy positions creeping closer to the city. The northern ice canyons, which had been a safe buffer, were now threatened by heavily armored patrols. "We cannot let them gain control of the canyons," Wulfric said, standing beside him. His voice was steady but carried the weight of responsibility. "If they hold the high ground, the city will be exposed." Ealdred nodded. "Then we must turn the terrain against them like we did before, but bigger this time. If we can lure them into the narrow passes, our defenses will multiply their weaknesses." The plan was daring. The Saxons would use the largest ice fortress yet, reinforced with stronger hulls and equipped with new energy pulse systems. Hidden within the ice would be channels and traps designed to confuse, slow, and immobilize the invaders' machines. Small Saxon squads would guide the enemy into the trap, using their knowledge of Heligra's terrain to lead them perfectly. The next morning, scouts reported the enemy advancing in force. This time, Charlemagne had sent elite squads along with the assault machines. They moved quickly, scanning for hidden threats, their confidence bolstered by previous victories. But the Saxons had prepared well. Every step the enemy took had been anticipated, every movement plotted. As the first machines entered the canyon, Ealdred gave the signal. Hidden barriers rose, channeling the enemy into narrow lanes. Ice spikes, sharpened and reinforced, erupted from the ground, slowing their advance. Energy pulses fired from concealed ports, disabling sensors and immobilizing machines. The invaders struggled. The terrain, once thought predictable, had become a deadly maze. Saxon warriors attacked from above, taking advantage of gravity and the icy cliffs to strike swiftly and retreat before the enemy could respond. Charlemagne watched the battle unfold through his fleet monitors. He was impressed but wary. "They are cleverer than expected," he said. "Adapt and respond. We cannot be defeated by terrain alone." The Saxons, however, had more than terrain on their side. Ealdred had devised a bold new tactic, hacking the enemy machines remotely. Using captured devices from previous encounters, Saxon engineers had discovered a vulnerability in the invaders' control systems. With careful precision, they could override machines temporarily, turning the enemy's own weapons against them. The first attempt was tense. A massive assault machine advancing toward the fortress suddenly stopped. Its sensors flickered, then it turned and fired on its allies. The Saxons held their breath, hoping the override would hold long enough to impact the battle. It worked. Chaos spread among the invaders. Machines collided, soldiers stumbled, and the well-organized advance became disorderly. The Saxons struck with precision, disabling or capturing enemy devices while minimizing their own losses. This marked the turning point. For the first time, Charlemagne's forces were forced to retreat in disorder. The Saxons had shown that intelligence, creativity, and courage could overcome even overwhelming technology. But the victory came with a price. Several Saxon warriors were injured, and the largest ice fortress had taken heavy damage. Ealdred and his engineers worked tirelessly to repair the structures, knowing that Charlemagne would return with even more advanced machines. The people of Heligra were inspired by the success. Families contributed to repairs, Children learned the importance of strategy, and the entire colony felt the power of human ingenuity. The victories had strengthened their resolve and reminded them of the unity that had always been their greatest weapon. Charlemagne, meanwhile, began to reconsider his approach. He had underestimated the Saxons' capacity to adapt and innovate. His fleet brought more advanced scanning devices, armored machines, and specialized squads designed to counter traps. Yet, with every new tool, the Saxons found new ways to counter it. Ealdred and Wulfric gathered the council to plan the next steps. "We cannot simply defend," Wulfric said. "We must strike decisively to show that Heligra cannot be conquered. If we force Charlemagne's forces into disadvantageous positions, we can turn the entire campaign in our favor." Ealdred nodded. "Agreed. We need to combine the ice fortresses, remote hacking, and guerrilla tactics into a single operation. It will require perfect timing, coordination, and courage, but it is possible." The plan involved a multi-layered attack. While small Saxon squads feigned retreats and led enemy forces into prepared traps, the largest ice fortress would move into a concealed position, ready to strike. Hidden explosives, energy pulses, and overridden machines would create confusion, turning the invaders' strength into a weakness. The operation began at dawn. The Saxons moved with silent precision, blending with the frozen terrain. Scouts lured the invaders toward the canyon, appearing vulnerable to draw the enemy in. Charlemagne's squads advanced confidently, unaware of the traps lying ahead. As the enemy entered the canyon, the largest ice fortress emerged from a concealed valley. Energy pulses fired, disabling machines and scattering soldiers. Explosives triggered beneath the enemy vehicles, freezing them in place. The Saxons struck from above, descending the cliffs with speed and precision. The invaders were trapped. Their formations collapsed under the combined effects of terrain, engineering, and strategy. Ealdred remotely controlled captured machines, turning the enemy's own power against them. Within hours, the elite squad sent to crush the Saxons was neutralized. Charlemagne watched in disbelief. His most powerful units had been outmaneuvered and outsmarted by humans he considered inferior. Yet, he recognized something important. The Saxons were not merely survivors. They were innovators, engineers, and warriors united in a common purpose. Back in the city, the Saxons celebrated the victory quietly. Injured warriors were treated, the ice fortress was repaired, and intelligence gathered from the battle would be invaluable for future encounters. But the celebration was tempered with caution. Charlemagne would return, and the next confrontation would be even more dangerous. Ealdred stood atop the repaired ice fortress, looking at the frozen plains below. The battle had tested every skill, every plan, and every ounce of courage the Saxons possessed. Yet it had also proven that human ingenuity, unity, and courage could overcome even the most powerful foes. Wulfric joined him. "We have shown them that we are not to be underestimated," he said. "But this is only the beginning. Charlemagne will come again stronger and more prepared." Ealdred nodded. "Then we will be ready. We have learned, adapted, and grown stronger. Heligra is ours, and we will protect it." In the following days, the Saxons strengthened their defenses further, repaired the ice fortresses, and improved their hacking systems. They trained new warriors, developed decoys, and mapped hidden tunnels and passages across the icy plains. Every person in the colony contributed, understanding that survival depended on courage, creativity, and unity. Charlemagne, meanwhile, regrouped his forces. He recognized the Saxons' extraordinary skills and began adjusting his strategy. Yet, even with advanced machines and trained squads, he knew that defeating Heligra would not be easy. Every move had to be precise, every tactic carefully considered. Ealdred continued to innovate. He designed mobile defenses that could move with the wind, energy pulses that could penetrate shields, and communication networks that allowed rapid coordination across the colony. The Saxons' confidence grew, not from arrogance, but from the knowledge that they had proven themselves capable of outsmarting a powerful enemy. The stage was set for an even greater confrontation. Charlemagne's forces would return, but the Saxons had learned the most important lesson. Intelligence, strategy, and courage could overcome brute force. Human ingenuity was the greatest weapon of all, and Heligra's people were determined to use it. As the aurora of Heligra's long night shimmered across the sky, the Saxons prepared for what was to come. The turning point had passed, and now the battle for the planet would enter a new phase, one that would test the limits of both sides, challenge the boundaries of human skill, and reveal the true power of unity and courage. Ealdred looked toward the horizon, where the distant lights of Charlemagne's fleet glimmered like tiny stars. He felt no fear, only determination. The Saxons had survived the first major challenge. They had adapted, outsmarted, and proven that humanity could triumph through cleverness and courage. The coming battles would be harder, but the Saxons knew this truth. With ingenuity, bravery, and unity, no enemy, no matter how powerful, could defeat the human spirit. Heligra was their home, and they would defend it with every resource, every strategy, and every ounce of courage they possessed. The turning point had arrived. Humanity, in the form of the Saxons, was no longer simply surviving. It was beginning to dominate. Heligra's frozen plains were quiet for the first time in weeks. A strange calm had settled over the Saxon colony, though everyone knew it was only temporary. Charlemagne's fleet loomed in the distance, far larger and more formidable than any force the Saxons had faced before. This was the final confrontation, the battle that would decide the fate of Heligra, and perhaps the reputation of humanity itself. Ealdred stood atop the highest ice tower in the city, looking at the approaching ships. The auroras danced across the sky, painting the icy landscape in green and violet light. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, yet he felt confident. The Saxons were not only defending their home, they were about to demonstrate the full extent of human ingenuity, courage, and unity. Wulfric approached, placing a steady hand on Ealdred's shoulder. "The enemy is strong," he said quietly, "but they have learned nothing. They do not understand the spirit of our people. We have the advantage if we strike at the right moment." Ealdred nodded. "It is time. Everything we have built, every plan we have devised leads to this. The ice fortresses, the tunnels, the decoys, the hacking systems, now we use them all. Charlemagne may have machines, but we have something he cannot match: human creativity." The Saxons began the final preparations. Families worked alongside warriors and engineers, fortifying defenses, stocking supplies, and ensuring communication networks were flawless. Children watched and learned, knowing that every contribution mattered. The city hummed with focused energy, each person aware that the coming hours could change the future forever. When the first squads of Charlemagne's elite forces moved across the plains, the Saxons were ready. The ice fortresses glided into position, blending with the frozen terrain. Hidden tunnels provided unexpected exits and ambush points. Remote systems were primed to override enemy machines at a critical moment. Decoys were strategically placed to confuse and mislead. The battle began with a sudden strike. Small Saxon squads feigned retreat, drawing the enemy deeper into prepared corridors between the ice cliffs. Energy pulses erupted from concealed fortresses, disabling sensors and halting advanced machines. Charlemagne's soldiers tried to regroup, but their formations were disrupted. Every step the enemy took played into Saxon hands. Ealdred remotely activated a captured control module, overriding several enemy machines simultaneously. The machines turned on their own units, creating confusion and disorder. Soldiers stumbled as machines collided, forcing the invaders into the canyon where hidden explosives waited. The Saxons struck from above, using gravity and the terrain to their advantage, while engineers guided the machines' movements with precision. The invaders' confidence began to crumble. Charlemagne's carefully planned assault had been turned against him. His elite squads were caught in traps, and his machines were no longer under his control. It was clear that the Saxons had outsmarted him at every level. Despite the chaos, Charlemagne remained composed. "Do not underestimate them," he commanded. "Adapt and respond. They may be clever, but we have the numbers and the technology. Push forward." The Saxons, however, were relentless. Every tactic Charlemagne deployed was anticipated and countered. Mobile ice fortresses struck from unexpected angles. Hidden tunnels allowed warriors to appear behind enemy lines. Remote hacking systems disabled machines before they could fire. Every move was calculated, every strike precise. In the heart of the canyon, the largest ice fortress emerged, towering above the frozen landscape. Energy pulses fired from concealed ports, targeting multiple enemy machines at once. Explosives triggered beneath key vehicles, freezing them solid. The elite squads, previously unstoppable, were immobilized. Charlemagne's forces were now facing an enemy that combined strategy, ingenuity, and perfect coordination. The turning point of the battle came when Ealdred led a strike team to the enemy's command module. Using captured technology, the team infiltrated the area, disabling communication and control systems. The invaders' machines were left without guidance, and the Saxons were able to isolate and neutralize each one systematically. Charlemagne watched helplessly as his forces were systematically dismantled. He realized that brute force and advanced technology alone could not win against humans who used intelligence, creativity, and courage in perfect harmony. As the battle reached its climax, the Saxons executed their final maneuver. Hidden tunnels allowed teams to flank the remaining enemy units, while the ice fortresses and overridden machines blocked escape routes. The enemy was forced to surrender, retreat, or face complete destruction. By the end of the day, Charlemagne's fleet had lost nearly all its forward units, and the remaining forces began to withdraw. The Saxons stood victorious. Their homes were safe, their people unharmed, and their ingenuity had turned the tide against a far superior enemy. The colony celebrated quietly, aware that this was not just a victory of strength, but of human spirit. Ealdred walked through the city, greeting warriors, engineers, and citizens alike. The pride in their eyes matched his own. They had faced overwhelming odds and proved that humans were capable of extraordinary feats when they worked together, thought creatively, and refused to surrender. Wulfric addressed the colony in the central square. "Today, we have not only defended our homes but demonstrated the true power of humanity. Charlemagne may command fleets and machines, but he cannot command the courage, creativity, and unity that define us. Let this victory be remembered as proof that human ingenuity can overcome any challenge." As the days passed, the Saxons repaired damaged structures, improved defenses, and continued to innovate. Heligra had become a symbol across the galaxy, a testament to what humans could achieve when faced with impossible odds. Word of the Saxons' ingenuity spread quickly, inspiring other colonies to embrace creativity, strategy, and courage in the face of adversity. Charlemagne, impressed and humbled, recognized the Saxons' strength. Instead of pursuing conquest, he established communication with the colony, acknowledging their resilience and skill. What began as an attempt to dominate had evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect. Charlemagne began to understand that humans could not be measured by machines or numbers alone. They were defined by their ability to think, adapt, and unite. Ealdred became a leader and teacher, sharing the lessons of Heligra with other human colonies. Engineers, warriors, and scholars from across the galaxy came to study Saxon strategies and innovations. The mobile ice fortresses, remote hacking systems, and creative use of terrain became legendary, inspiring a new era of human ingenuity and cooperation. In the evenings, Ealdred often walked to the cliffs overlooking the frozen plains, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The auroras danced above, as if celebrating the victory of the human spirit. He thought of every person who had contributed to the defense, warriors who had fought with courage, engineers who had worked tirelessly, and citizens who had supported the efforts with unwavering determination. "This is just the beginning," Ealdred whispered. "We have proven what humanity can do. We have shown that intelligence, courage, and unity can overcome any challenge. Heligra is ours, and so is the future." The Saxons had endured hardship, faced overwhelming odds, and emerged victorious. Their story became a legend, a reminder that humans could accomplish anything when they relied on their minds, hearts, and unity. Across the galaxy, the tale of Heligra inspired others, proving that no force, however powerful, could diminish the spirit of humanity. The frozen plains remained quiet, but the echoes of human courage resonated far beyond Heligra. Charlemagne's fleet had been forced to retreat, not defeated by brute strength, but outwitted, outplanned, and outmaneuvered by a civilization that refused to surrender. Ealdred stood one final time on the cliffs, looking at the horizon where the sun reflected off the icy landscape. He felt pride, hope, and determination. The Saxons had won, but more importantly, they had shown what humanity was truly capable of. Brilliance in the face of adversity, courage when facing danger, and unity that could overcome the most formidable challenges. And so, Heligra remained a symbol of the human spirit. The Saxons' victory under Ealdred's guidance marked the triumph of intelligence, creativity, and unity over overwhelming force. They had faced the greatest challenge of their lives, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. The galaxy would remember this victory not for the machines or fleets, but for the humans who dared to fight, think, and persevere. The story of Heligra was no longer just a tale of survival. It was a story of humanity's potential, its ingenuity, and its unyielding spirit. Even as new challenges loomed on the horizon, the Saxons knew one undeniable truth. As long as humans had courage, creativity, and unity, no force in the galaxy could conquer them. The frozen plains of Heligra had witnessed history, and humanity had triumphed. Time passed slowly on Heligra after the great conflict ended. The frozen plains were no longer filled with the hum of enemy machines or the tension of constant danger. Instead, the land echoed with the sounds of rebuilding, learning, and quiet hope. The Saxon colony had survived something that many believed was impossible. They had faced a vast, powerful force and emerged not only intact, but stronger. Ealdred walked through the city each morning, observing the changes. Ice towers were repaired and reinforced, not only as defenses but as symbols of endurance. New energy systems glowed softly beneath transparent ice walls. Children laughed as they moved between learning halls, now teaching both science and the old Saxon traditions. Life had returned, but it was no longer the same as before. The people of Heligra had changed. They were no longer just a distant colony surviving in isolation. They were now known across nearby systems as thinkers, engineers, and defenders of human ingenuity. News of the Saxons' victory spread quickly through the human territories. Traders, scholars, and explorers spoke of Heligra with respect. Stories told of moving ice fortresses, clever strategies, and humans who defeated a superior force not through destruction, but through intelligence and unity. Charlemagne's retreat had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. In his flagship, far from Heligra, Charlemagne studied reports again and again. Every analysis reached the same conclusion. His defeat was not caused by weak planning or poor technology. It was caused by underestimating the human mind when it was pushed to its limits. The Saxons did not fight like rebels, Charlemagne said to his advisors. They fought like architects of the future. For the first time in his long career, Charlemagne changed his strategy. Instead of expansion through force, he began seeking cooperation. Heligra became the first place he reached out to not as a conqueror but as a negotiator. When the message arrived, the Saxon council gathered in silence. Many were cautious, others were curious. Ealdred stood quietly, reading the words carefully. Charlemagne acknowledged the Saxons as equals. He proposed shared research, open travel routes, and mutual defense agreements. There was no threat in his words, only respect. After long discussion, the council agreed to cautious cooperation. The war had proven something important. Humanity was strongest when it learned from itself, not when it tried to dominate itself. Heligra slowly became a meeting place for human civilizations. Engineers from other systems arrived to study Saxon designs. They learned how simple materials, when used creatively, could outperform expensive machines. Scholars documented the strategies used during the conflict, turning them into lessons for future generations. Ealdred became a teacher, though he never asked for the role. He spoke not about winning battles but about solving problems. "We did not survive because we were stronger," he told young engineers. "We survived because we observed, adapted, and trusted one another. That is the true strength of humanity." New academies were built on Heligra, carved into the ice cliffs. Inside, humans from many worlds studied engineering, strategy, and cooperation. The planet that once stood alone now became a center of shared knowledge. The Saxons never forgot the cost of the conflict. Memorial halls were built, quiet places of reflection where names were etched into crystal ice. These were not monuments to victory, but reminders of responsibility. Every innovation, every decision, carried weight. Power had to be guided by wisdom. Children visited these halls as part of their education. They learned that courage was not about aggression, but about standing firm when it mattered most. Years passed. Heligra changed slowly but steadily. New cities formed along the ice plains, built with the same careful balance between tradition and progress. Energy networks expanded, using systems designed during the war but refined for peaceful use. The ice fortresses were no longer weapons. They became mobile research stations, disaster response centers, and exploration hubs. Tools once made for defense now helped humanity understand harsh environments across the galaxy. The legacy of the conflict reshaped human thinking. Other colonies, inspired by Heligra, began focusing on adaptability rather than raw power. Smaller worlds realized they did not need massive fleets to protect themselves. They needed unity, planning, and creativity. Charlemagne's empire also changed. He reduced forced expansion and encouraged alliances. His fleets became protectors of trade routes rather than tools of conquest. Though he never ruled Heligra, he respected it deeply. In private conversations, he often referred to the Saxons as the moment humanity reminded itself who it truly was. Ealdred aged as all humans do. His hair turned silver, his steps slower, but his mind remained sharp. He spent his later years guiding young thinkers, reminding them that technology was only as good as the people who used it. One evening, he stood once more on the cliffs overlooking the frozen plains. The aurora shimmered above, just as it had during the war. The land was peaceful now, no enemy lights on the horizon, no alarms, only stars. A young student approached him. "Do you think the galaxy will ever forget Heligra?" the student asked. Ealdred smiled gently. "They may forget the details, but they will remember the lesson." "What lesson?" "That humans are not defined by the size of their weapons," Ealdred said. "We are defined by our ability to think, to adapt, and to stand together when everything seems impossible." The student nodded, understanding slowly. When Ealdred passed away years later, Heligra paused. Work stopped for a single day. Lights dimmed across the cities. People gathered not in sadness but in gratitude. His teachings lived on in every engineer who questioned assumptions, in every leader who chose cooperation over domination. Heligra never built statues of him. Instead, they followed his example. As centuries passed, historians marked the conflict with Charlemagne as a turning point in human history, not because of a great destruction, but because of a great realization. Humanity did not need to conquer the galaxy to define itself. It needed to understand itself. The Saxons of Heligra became a symbol, not of rebellion, but of potential. They proved that even in the coldest, harshest environments, the human spirit could grow stronger. Across distant systems, when young humans faced impossible odds, they were told stories of Heligra. Stories of ice turned into shelter, of knowledge turned into defense, of unity turned into strength. And always the same message echoed. When humans think together, nothing is truly impossible. The frozen planet remained, calm and bright beneath distant stars. Its people continued to live, learn, and build, not in fear of the galaxy, but as part of it. The shocking fate of the Saxons under Charlemagne's rule was no longer about domination or resistance. It became a story of awakening. A story where humanity remembered its greatest weapon was not force, but mind, heart, and unity. And that story, once born on the icy plains of Heligra, would echo across the galaxy forever.